All right, y'all, we're back for the final portion of this. I'm gonna be a little bit more serious here. Again, forgive my goofiness in the previous one. Also, too, I know, on first glance, I had a pretty visceral type of reaction to this right here. Yes, this is heavy. This is saying a lot. There's manifold understanding with regard to the intricacies in each point that is being made here. Okay? Because you almost literally have to break this down line by line in context to the discussion. So, what do we mean that they forced the slave trade? Because we've already seen where no, it's a little more complex than that, and they were not all unwilling. I mean, this is just such a broad statement to make that is very inaccurate to the reality of what happened. And then it's like this suspicion, though, because they really can't prove it. So, either through commercial inequities that emerged, which commerce, for that to happen, requires a buyer and a seller. Like, it is a system, it is a process. So, betwixt these two entities, inequities, I don't think were forced upon Africans. They may have been the result of these complex relationships that existed within. But again, those are complex relationships, and you can't make a broad statement like that. The military pressure that Europeans brought to bear, but there's like cannons and I don't know. Like, I just feel like there's a lot more military pressure and even just warfare techniques and tactics that the Africans could employ. I don't know, man. And maybe like in the later years of the trade with particular places in Africa, there may have been more, subjecting in these powers that are rising up because of these agreements, because of this trade, are now, taking the power that they've been both given and gained by, whatever means, and using that forcefully. But this still just does not sit right. It's just very incomplete and I feel like inaccurate. But anyway, y'all, let us finish this. Okay. And I believe we're right here. So the slave trade assuredly changed African politics, but its impact admitted wide variations. The history of the kingdoms of Ashanti and Oyo provided a case in point. Okay, my bad, y'all. I just wanted to make sure this is like where we left off. All right. During the late 17th century, Ashanti challenged Dinkaira, the dominant power of the Gold Coast. In time, Ashanti incorporated most of the Twi-speaking peoples of the region. As a direct result of this conquest, the number of Ashanti exported as slaves declined after 1730, while the largest body of slaves exported from the Gold Coast came from among the Voltaic peoples. In the Oyo Empire, by comparison, a protracted constitutional crisis and a series of factional disputes that began in the 1700s brought political instability. The regime. The magnitude of slave exports increased as the power of the state declined. Europeans did not themselves need to come to Africa to overwhelm the continent and dominate the slave trade. If the rulers of Benin, Ashanti, Congo, Dahomey, and Loango sold great numbers into slavery over many generations. The monarchs of Europe benefited most from those transactions. Ferdinand of Aragon granted the first license to carry slaves who had been purchased in the slave markets of Seville to the New World. King John III of Portugal was responsible for an even more dangerous innovation. He agreed so this is kind of like, and y'all forgive me, but this is kind of like, I mean, we were fine on our own enslaving these people. We didn't need you to come up over here and just completely overwhelm the system we had in place. Like, how dare you? And again, trust me, I'm not taking any onus away from the European powers and the Spanish powers that indeed participated and benefited, okay, and would soon go on to employ one of the most cruel, vile, horrific systems of enslavement known to man. Trust me, I am not taking away from that. But in the context of what we are reading right now, the tone of this to me is like, y'all really didn't have to come over here for real and start overwhelming stuff and messing stuff up, because we had a good thing going. And you don't hear a lot of continental Africans, and I understand that a lot of these nation states, a lot of these places are no longer, and a lot of the countries that exist today are relatively new. Almost all of them, like, having been founded within like the last 100 years, like maybe late 1800s, but certainly 1900s. And so it's like, that also kind of confuses me, because a lot of these individuals that come from these places are so adamant and passionate about defending a history that I don't know that they necessarily understand or really don't holistically admit to, and the role of their people, if that's what they're claiming, to a history that is so dark. And you come over to a land and to a place where was really only made possible because of the suffering and sacrifice and fight of foundational Black Americans. And there's just so much vitriol, so much disrespect, so much inconsideration. And you're literally given a leg up in resources over natives, and have so much pride and arrogance. And then cry victim and cry foul, and then try to completely change history and tell a completely revisionist story of your involvement and the involvement of your people. And so it gets so confusing and ridiculous, and it don't make no darn sense. And it's like, how dare you? How dare you? I don't understand that. That's horrible, you know? It really is. And why this is significant, why we are kind of looking into all of this stuff, is because, again, it's important we start setting the record straight. It's important we start delineating and making distinction, especially when it comes to who really contributed the most and imparted a lot of the wisdom that fuels many of the systems that are in place today, right? Who's responsible for having built a lot of those systems? And, we're going to delve deeper into that. And, specifically for me, looking at different systems of medicine and healing, which often intertwine religious and spiritual practices. And so I am also making an effort, to make distinction between what religious or spiritual practices actually survived that journey from Africa, and which ones were forged and created here, or which ones even predate all of that, and the elements of that kind of still remain. And are any of these belief systems really serving us, really helping us to heal, really aligned with what our Creator desires for us to be following? All right, so that's the significance and purpose of this. And because this channel is also dedicated to studying history to some degree. All right? But yeah, so that's what I got to say on that. But let's keep reading. Europeans did not themselves need to come to Africa to overwhelm the continent and dominate the slave trade. If ruler, okay, I already read that. He agreed in 1530 that slaves could be transported directly from Africa to the Americas. This is King John. All right. King Louis the what? 10 plus 1 plus 5. All right. A France permitted his ministers to pay a bounty for every slave delivered to the New World, a bounty that the French government was still disturbing in 1790. As Hugh Thomas had pointed out, many others had unexpected connections to the slave trade from which they indirectly profited. For sure. I mean, it supplied everything. Yeah. The father of the French writer, Francois. Y'all forgive me. I tried. Woo, I tried. Francois Auguste René de Chateaubriand was a slave merchant. The leisure that the English historian Edward Gibbon enjoyed to write his masterpiece, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Ooh, I gotta check that out. Because y'all know that kind of goes into back to them biblical times. All right. Derived from the fortune his grandson had accumulated as a director of the South Sea Company, the principal occupation of which was to carry African slaves and British ships to the Spanish Empire. John Locke, the philosopher of revolution, liberty, and property, was a shareholder in the Royal Africa Company, the initials of which, RAC, were branded upon many black chests during the last 25 years of the 17th century. Those who trafficked in slaves, the merchants who brought and sold them, and the captains and crews of the slave ships that delivered them into bondage were no worse than the planters who constituted the market. A few African leaders tried to escape participation in the slave trade. Mostly they failed. And Africa grew poorer and weaker as a result, right? So yeah, I mean, even this, like, I want to know more about this because yeah, there may have been a few, but like, how did they fail? Did they succumb to the pressures and to realizing like, oh my goodness, in order for us to economically sustain or whatever, like, yo, we're gonna have to participate in this. And at the end of the day, it's still a choice. It's still a choice, you know? I mean, I don't want to take away from having some level of sympathy and understanding that a lot of the environmental, social, economical, political determinants to livelihood and your health even and your ability to sustain as a people influence, they do. They have a grave impact on your decisioning, you know? And in some cases, I guess this could support the very few, again, you know, the argument in the paragraph above that I had an issue with, that they were kind of like forced to turn to this institution as if they had no other choice. But at the end of the day, it was still a choice. It was, you know. Lamentably, the merchants, ship captains, planters, rulers, and of course the slaves themselves were all entangled in a vast commercial network from which few could escape, into which, at least until the 1780s, fewer still took exception. Yeah, y'all. And here's all of the different resources that went into laying these arguments out and the evidence to support them. And as we can conclude, and as we saw, there really is no opposing viewpoint. There really is no dispute that exists as to whether or not Africans willingly collaborated and in some cases controlled and started aspects of the transatlantic slave trade. And it was based on a system, a very intricate system that was already in place for centuries, back to biblical times. you know? And of course, what that kind of servitude, serfdom, slavery looked like on the continent was much, 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 much different than what it would become through European powers in the New World. There really should not at all be any conversation or argument around whether or not their participation and all of the benefits from that are a true reality. So yeah, hopefully this cleared this up for some of y'all. Now I'm interested in seeing these particular perspectives. Did African slaves sustain their cultures in North America? Actually, hold on. Okay, yeah, this will be a good starting point. One viewpoint is yes, slaves in North America managed to retain important elements of their culture. Sorry, let me take some water. Of their cultural lives and practices, such as kinship networks, family structures, and religious beliefs. The other is no. The shock of capture and the horrors of the Middle Passage caused slaves to lose connection with their African past quickly. And my thing is this, if we're just thinking logically, if we know that many of the Africans brought over came from varying different regions, varying different tribes, varying different, I mean, even within tribes, you had so many differences, right? And if a lot of those sold over were prisoners of war, meaning that they may have been taken from different tribes, lived among certain people for a time. I mean, I really need to and want to delve into the nature of existing in Africa and in a lot of those places during that time was like. And I don't know what records would showcase that, but I really wonder what that was like. And if the prisoners of war, or if these people were in systems of service and servitude already and considered outsiders and already othered, what sort of limitations or like restrictions did they experience from being able to participate even in the culture at that time? So like if certain family members were in servitude to certain families and they were kept outside of that community that was indenturing them, would that be the right term? Then they weren't able to necessarily partake in a lot of the cultural aspects of that. And so in a way, like, there were tons of ethnogenesis happening even in that dynamic, which is why I think there is and there continues to kind of be this sort of cultivation of all of these different beliefs and languages and tribes and what do they call them, even houses, you know? Like, I mean, if we want to talk about division and really looking at examples of that, I think many places on the continent of Africa do a great job at showcasing that, what it means to be divided, really, because it's very integral to the collective culture there, you know? And not just there, but other parts of the world too, but there for sure. So yeah, I don't know, y'all. I just got a lot of questions, but we're going to delve into that. I'm going to end the video here because this is the final part of Complicity, and then we will start this in another one. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share. If you do comment, make sure, please, that you're being respectful, that you're being, cordial and mindful of what you are saying and stating. And yeah, let's have a discussion, y'all. What do y'all think? What do y'all think? Do you think that this was sufficient, that this did enough to end the argument, to say once and for all, yay or nay? Let me know in the comment section what y'all think. All right, be blessed.